Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's discussion with Senator Tim Kaine. We are going to give it just a couple moments to let people sign into the meeting, which a lot of people are doing right now. As we do that, wanted to let you know that DemBiz just this week launched a brand new website. It is live now and a major upgrade from our previous site, so we hope you check it out. You can learn more about the organization. You can watch previous recordings of webinars like this one. And perhaps most importantly, you can become a member, which we certainly encourage you to do. So you can visit us at www.dembiz.org. That's DEMBIZ.org. And looks like we are pretty well attended at this point. We'll let more folks jump in, but might as well go ahead and get going. We've got about an hour with Senator Kaine. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris King, the president of the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia, and it is always a great day when we can hear the insightful words from Senator Tim Kaine. Senator Kaine, good morning and welcome back to DemBiz.
Chris, it's great to be back. I have so enjoyed my opportunities to be with DemBiz over the last many years. Congratulations to you on your leadership, and doing it in this format is new for all of us. So I'm excited to talk today and take people's questions, take people's suggestions.
All right, well, we're looking forward to it. And I think everybody knows your background, but very briefly, former mayor of Richmond, former lieutenant governor, former governor, and now serving his second term in the United States Senate. Just a brief overview of how this will go this morning. So I've got a few questions for Senator Kaine, and then I will start taking questions from the audience. If you have a question, you can click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and punch that in, and I will be choosing those as we move through this hour. We also got some questions via email before the event, so I will throw some of those in as well. All right, so being DemBiz, Senator Kaine, let's start with business and the economy. We've had the CARES Act, we've had major, multi-trillion-dollar stimulus packages put out there. As of right now, I believe that the House of Representatives has passed a $3 trillion bill that includes $1 trillion for states and localities, but it's stalled in the Senate. Where are we on these measures, and what do you expect to come next?
Chris, so yeah, you set it up well, and let me just summarize what we've already done, but then what is the next task at hand? We passed, beginning the first week of March, 4 pieces of legislation. The CARES Act was the largest, the one at the end of March. But the way to look at the bills together is 4 bills, trillions of dollars, dramatically larger than the Recovery Act done after the 2008-2009 fiscal collapse. And you can look at the bills as basically trying to provide resources into 5 pillars to deal with this economic and health crisis. So pillar 1 is aid to families and individuals. So that would be the direct payment, unemployment insurance, some protection against eviction and foreclosure, some SNAP food benefits. That's all bucket 1. Families and individuals. Bucket 2, aid to small businesses, the PPP program, the SBA's EIDL loan program, small business, and it was largely loans that could be converted to grants. Pillar 3 is lending options for larger businesses. Now, these aren't grants, these would be loans administered by Treasury primarily, or the Fed. Pillar 4, aid to state and local governments. Pillar 5, aid to hospitals, the VA, our healthcare providers broadly defined, nursing homes, et cetera. So trillions of dollars into those 5 pillars. When we got to the end of April, after having passed the CARES Act, we realized we had to refill the tank on the small business portion. We had done $350 billion. We basically put another $370 billion into small businesses at the end of April. The PPP program, a new program to focus on smaller financial institutions who have smaller business clients. We also needed to refill the pillar on hospitals and healthcare, because this is very different than the fiscal collapse of 2008-09, which was an economic crisis driven by economic conditions. This is an economic crisis driven by a healthcare pandemic, and not until we get through that will we see the economic lift we need. So we needed more for hospitals and healthcare. Now what do we do? I think the priority right now should be refilling the pillar for individuals and families. We can talk about what's the best way to do that. So many people are hurting, lost their jobs. We need to refill that pillar. And the second thing I think we need to do is refill the pillar for state and local governments. Virginia's like 46 states. July 1 to June 30 fiscal year for the state and for local government. So that means everybody's doing their budgets right now. And local governments, I know from my time as mayor, they've seen dramatic and immediate declines in revenue. So as they're projecting into the July 1 to June 30, they're looking at layoffs, furloughs, et cetera. There's never a good time to lay off state and local government employees. But since the overwhelming percentage of our first responders are state and local government employees, the wrong time to do it is in the middle of a global health emergency. Right. We shouldn't be laying off fire, EMT, sheriffs, police, teachers in the middle of this pandemic. So I think when we go back, you're right, the House passed this $3 trillion HEROES Act, which has a lot of good in it. But I am very focused on two things, state and local government aid, and not just dollars, but more flexibility to use the dollars the right way, and more assistance for individuals and families. So that's what I think we need to do next. That's what I'm advocating. As I'm crossing the state this week virtually, I'm talking to people about that so I can advocate next week when we're back in session.
Well, and obviously there's a spillover effect. A firefighter is a job, just like every other job, and has a multiplier effect in the economy. So that will impact restaurants and shops and everything else, just like every other job out there.
Sure will. And in fact, the jobs report at the end of April showed that nearly 1 million state and local government employees lost their jobs in April. Most of them were local government employees. So even in April, you were seeing already nearly 1 million people who work for state and local governments losing their jobs. And that's going to accelerate if we don't do something to stop that, that damage.
Okay. So I want to ask you about, I mentioned that it was stalled in the Senate. Two concerns that Mitch McConnell has expressed. One is that he thinks that unemployment benefits are too high, are sufficiently high that they are dissuading people from going back to work. So that's one. Another one is that he wants liability protections for businesses, hospitals, churches, other entities like that. What are your views on those two items?
There are some elements in there that are reasonable and true, but there's also some, I would say, a lack of context that's not accidental. It is true, when we put together the unemployment insurance program in the CARES Act, we basically expanded UI benefits in two ways, Chris. First, we expanded the universe. Senator Warner always brings this up. Only about 30% of the workforce fits within a traditional UI system because sole proprietors, self-employed, gig workers, independent contractors, multiple part-time, they don't. So we expanded the universe of UI to include the larger universe of people. That was a very good thing. We also realized part of the goal was to get money out fast. We couldn't set up a benefit system that was different in every state, et cetera. So what we did is we said, look, you get what you would get under the state system plus $600 a week through the end of July. For some, that is more than the salary they would earn. But the same way, we set up a PPP program where a business could get a loan. You didn't have to show that you had a revenue loss. You didn't have to show that. You could get a loan and it would be converted to a grant. So we didn't trouble ourselves with, well, a business might get a PPP loan when they didn't experience a revenue loss. So the whole goal was we needed to get dollars into the economy fast to stop the free fall and to protect some people. And if there were some who could do better under UI than being at work, it was not all bad to have people stay home rather than go to work a lot when this virus was spreading so quickly. However, that comes to the end on the 31st of July. Here would be my preference going forward. I think we should try to maintain the broad universe of people who can get UI. I think we should start to step the benefit down because I don't think once the economy is ready to open, I don't think we should give an incentive that would make people stay away from work. I think it was very justifiable if we're going to do something fast for businesses, for individuals, that was very justifiable for a limited period of time, but I think we should start to step it down. On the liability protection side, so you will hear some Republicans say, no way, we're not giving money to state and local governments. And you'll hear some Democrats say, no way, no liability protection. I think, look, the right answer is, while liability protection is more often state law rather than federal law, we do give liability protection in health emergencies. So for example, we give federal liability protection to vaccine manufacturers. If the vaccine has been approved, we give them liability protection. So there is a precedent during a health emergency for some liability protection. Here's what I'd like to do, but as of yet, the Republicans hadn't put a proposal on the table. If we established a set of, like a standard of care, you reopen your business, follow these basic regulations to keep everybody safe. And if you do, nobody can sue you if they get coronavirus and say they got it when they were a customer or they were in your workplace. So if you couple liability protection with a standard of care, you meet these regs and then you're insulated from suit. But just liability protection with no standard of care, like you can reopen and nobody can see you, that isn't what we should do. As of yet, the GOP, they want this, but they haven't put on the table a proposal. Senator Cornyn of Texas is the architect on the GOP side. That folks say he's the one who's going to do it. But as of yet, we've not seen it. But I'm open to the idea, standard of care and liability protection if you meet it. I'm open to that.
Well, and as an aside, I don't really understand how somebody can identify one establishment as the place that they might have got something. You know, they go to the grocery store, they go to church, they go running. It's tough to prove that you got it at restaurant X. But
right now, I think there are circumstances where, like, if we're dealing with hospital employees or first responders, you could have a presumption if they got it, they likely got it on the job because they're working in jobs where there's significant elevated risk over just the average risk. But you're right, for you and me, if we go to the grocery store, if we go to get takeout food at a restaurant, if we're doing a variety of things, it would be hard to pin it to any particular place once the virus is spread so widely.
All right, and so we're kind of dual tracking with a future relief package, and then at the same time we're wrestling with this idea of when and how to reopen the economy and do it in a way that to keep businesses from going out of business and keep people employed. So Donald Trump has, from the outset, said we need to reopen ASAP. Now we're finding out that a lot of the online accounts that were advocating for that are bots. So what is your sense? I guess this is kind of a 2020 question also, but what is your sense of how that will play for, we'll call it the persuadable voter who just wants leadership at the top and still wants to, the economy to reopen, but they want to stay safe?
Yeah, look, I think any reasonable person looking at this would give the Trump administration an F for how they've handled this. There are some things they're doing well, and I don't mind, I'll point those out. I don't mind, but on the handling of this public health emergency, I cannot imagine them having done it any worse. And that's despite the fact that they have some really good people. Fauci and others are smart. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, Trump follows their advice, but then he'll undercut it. My favorite example of this was President Trump announced, I think it was the first Thursday in May at a press conference, here is the path to reopening, this three-phased path to reopening, data-driven, not a date certain for every part of the country, but a data-driven 3 phases. He announced that in a call with the governors, and we have the federal delegation in Virginia have a call with Governor Northam every Thursday at 5:30 to trade news. What are you doing? What are you doing? The governor had just gotten off the phone with the president with all the other governors, and I said, well, what do you think of President Trump's announcement? And our Dr. Governor said, actually, that's smart. That's what we're doing. It's science-based. This is the path we're going to pursue. He was very complimentary, which I was pleasantly surprised at. Mm-hmm. The very next morning, President Trump is tweeting out, liberate Virginia, liberate Michigan, liberate Wisconsin, attacking the very governors who he just spoke to 12 hours before who were following his advice. So I think what the American public is seeing is, first, an unprecedented and unnecessary number of deaths, and second, an unprecedented and unnecessary collapse of the economy. And I say unnecessary because let's just compare to other nations. January 21, U.S. and South Korea had nearly identical unemployment rates. We both had our first case of coronavirus that day. March 3rd, our unemployment rates were still nearly identical, right around 4%. The U.S. had 9 deaths from coronavirus, South Korea 28. But by early May, when you got the end of month April figures, the unemployment rate in South Korea had gone up by 1 point from 4 to 5. It had tripled in the United States, from 4.8 to now nearly 15. South Korea had 260 deaths. The United States at the beginning of May had, nearly 80,000. And so here is an example in just the coldest, bluntest terms of how poorly the U.S. has handled it. So I think people do want guidance from the top, but they're not getting it from Team Trump, except for that 3-phase. And I do think the 3-phase plan is what Governor Northam is intending to follow, following the data and recognizing that in a state as large as Virginia, there are going to be some regional differences. There's regional differences in the extent of the spread, but there's also regional differences. Like if you're a business owner in Bristol, Virginia, and the Tennessee governor has allowed businesses to open up across the street, you have to take into account surrounding states. And Bristol and Tennessee is going to be a little bit different than Arlington and then DC and Maryland. So the governor's trying to take those things into account. It is a very, very difficult balancing act. But I think he understands if we reopen too soon, then people get sick again and we have to do another shutdown. When we go back out then and say, well, we probably reopened too soon, but now we're safe, we can reopen now, there will be a little bit of a boy who cried wolf phenomenon. People might not trust us, and that may then slow the uptick in the economy that we should get once we start to see the number of cases decline.
Okay. And as you look at the medical data, which is constantly evolving, I mean, we're learning more about this virus by the week, it seems like. What is your sense of whether a second wave is inevitable, whether it is likely, whether the steps that are being taken right now to reopen the economy will be sufficient to keep people healthy?
Well, I think a second wave is likely to happen. And whether it's a big wave or just a continued spread, we've now passed 100,000 deaths. And I do believe the medical research that says this is drastically worse than the flu in the mortality rate. But the flu's mortality rate is 1/10 of 1%. So this might be 1%. But say it's 1%, it's 10 times worse than the flu. 100,000 deaths means 10 million cases. We've diagnosed about 1.5 million cases. I have a feeling there's a whole lot more of it. A whole lot more people had it when those symptoms are mild symptoms. So that means 10 million. But as people are out and starting to get active again, I think you're going to continue to see spread. The good news is many don't have symptoms, or many have very mild cases. That's great. But you're going to continue to see spread. The only way to really stop it, the U.S. didn't follow this path, and that was the South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand path that was good for health and good for the economy. Widespread testing immediately. If you test positive, we'll contact trace everybody we're with, and we'll test them too. Then anybody who tests positive, we isolate you and give you medical care. But by isolating you and giving you medical care, we don't have to close down the rest of the economy. Basically, we are isolating and treating sick people, and we didn't have to close down everything else. That's why the unemployment rate in South Korea went from 4 to 5, where ours went from 4.5 to nearly 15. Right. But because the federal government, and I got the head of the CDC to basically admit that they never did the contact tracing. They started in very briefly, but the combination of President Trump downplaying the problem for 6 to 8 weeks means we didn't start testing early. By the time we realized it was a problem, the caseload was rising so fast, they just never did contact tracing. So I don't think we have the ability to just contain it. What we can do, though, is, especially as I'm thinking about, maybe August, September, when schools start to reopen, and parents are really thinking about this. Right. If on schools and campuses we have good testing, both virus testing, but also antibody testing, we can make sure that people who are sick or might infect others, can be home and get their course content online. Here's a hidden virtue in this. Our colleges, even K-12 schools, have gotten a lot better at delivering course content online. So somebody who is sick now or potentially exposed or needs to quarantine, they don't have to miss out. They can actually continue to get content. But to do that right, when schools reopen, we're going to need dramatic testing. And that's what both the governor and the White House is now saying. The White House said to me in a hearing 10 days ago, we need to have the ability to do 40 to 50 million tests a month come September. Break it down. That's 1.3 to 1.7 million tests a day. We're doing about 400 to 500,000 tests a day now. So we need to about triple our testing capacity by the start of the school year, as well as having an ability to do widespread antibody testing.
Okay. And as you said, Donald Trump, looking at it reasonably, gets a very, very poor grade for his performance in this. In terms of, and this is the last question before we jump into some audience questions, but in terms of Joe Biden's economic message and a winning message this year, what do you think that winning message is for the economy?
Well, really good question. I mean, I think anybody who's going to be president has to look everybody in the face and answer at least two questions. You got to believe about your candidate that they can help the economy do well where you live, not generally, not in the stock market or the GDP. They have to have a credible message that they can help the economy be thriving and sustainable in your community. And then second, you have to have a president who can look you in the eye and you can feel this person can keep me safe. Now, President Trump has failed on both counts. His legacy as a president is now depression and death. I couldn't say it any stronger. Right. But you're not going to win. You're not going to win off just the other guy's horrible. I think the vice president has a couple of really strong things going for him on a policy standpoint. We talk politically too. His longstanding work in Foreign Relations Committee, knowledge of global leaders, work with President Obama, I think it gives him a very credible ability to say, hey, I can keep you safe. America, I can keep you safe. I know how to do it. Whether it's diplomacy or whether it's military, I know how to do it. I think the issue that the tougher issue for Dems is I can handle the economy better than the other guy. I noticed, I'll tell you this, Chris, when I was running against Corey Stewart in 2018, and I won by a sizable percentage, we were polling all along the way. And one of the poll questions we asked is, well, who'll do better for the economy, Democrats or Republicans? Even in that year, which was a really good year for Democrats, the generic answer by Virginians was, well, Republicans will do better. Now, if it matched up Kaine or Stewart, I did better than Corey. But even in a good year for Dems, the Virginians were still saying they thought Republicans were better on the economy. Trump's mishandling of this crisis has given us a powerful door that's open where we can make a great economic argument. And I think maybe the way Biden should do it, people always believe you more when they think you've done it before, is he can say, look, I was part of one rescue and we now need another one. In Michigan, he's got a very strong claim. Hey, we helped bring the auto industry back from death's door. When they came in, the economy was in a free fall, and the work that they did led to the longest economic expansion in American history as measured by the number of months. So you can say, look, I've been part of a turnaround when the nation desperately needed it, and we desperately need it, and we need to turn it around now. That's a frame, but within that frame, I think what Joe needs is a powerful innovation message. I think he needs a powerful innovation message. A VP pick can help him with that, starting to show the American public the kind of people that he would have around him. I would hope his economic team would not look like kind of a Wall Street team. I hope it might be more of a, Northern Virginia technology or Silicon Valley I hope it's a more innovative team.
We can put him in touch with some folks. How about that?
I think an innovation team would send a really good signal rather than sort of a traditional like Wall Street team. And I'm shorthanding, but I think you get what I mean.
Definitely. And hopefully this current crisis is allowing people to see the connection between business and the broader infrastructure available in the economy. It's not, we can't tax cut or regulation cut our way out of this. We need to come up with innovation, and it's got to be a kind of a well-rounded approach. Mm-hmm. All right. So before we jumped on, I got some email questions from people and wanted to get to, actually the vast majority of those were regarding climate change. So I'll name a couple names here: Judy, George, Meredith, Emily, Joan, and many more, including some who have written questions in the Q&A box since we started. I'll just use Emily Irvine's question here as an example. So most economists agree that putting a meaningful price on carbon and other greenhouse gases would be the most effective way to curb CO2 emissions. Virginia's new Clean Economy Act and subsequent entry into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is one way of doing that. It could be done at the federal level by levying a fee per ton of pollution at the entry point into the supply chain, whether that is at the border or where fossil fuels come out of the ground. Senator Kaine, do you support putting a price on carbon and other greenhouse gases?
We've had some test votes on this. I would be very open to voting yes to a price on carbon, depending upon how the dollars would be used. I don't want to do this to bring money into the federal treasury if it was refunded back out to consumers, so that it's not just building up the federal budget. I think a program like that James Hansen and others support, I think has a lot of sense. I will say, though, I see that as that would be incredibly difficult step in Congress right now. I think it would be very, very hard. I think there are steps in Congress that can start to accomplish the goal, which would actually be easier, interim steps that I think would be powerful, and I'll give you one. We do a lot of basically price supports for energy. We have, tax breaks for oil, gas, and coal. We have tax breaks or tax credits for wind, solar, all forms of energy. It used to be that we needed to have some tax breaks for wind and solar and geothermal because the price per unit was higher than dirty fossil fuels. The good news is the price per unit on alternative fuels has come down dramatically. I think a bill that could have a real chance of passing Congress, even a Congress constituted not too different than the one we have right now, is a bill that says, let's take off all price supports for all energy and let all energy just compete even up without any price supports. That would have the benefit of we're not picking winners and we're reducing the deficit, which starts to get some Republicans willing to be on board. And you know what? I think wind and solar are at a point now where they can compete even up with dirtier forms of fuel. So I view that as a path to a lower or no carbon footprint for the United States and even other nations that has more possibility of passing Congress than a price on carbon. But again, the idea of the price on carbon refundable to consumers, Jim Hansen and others say that's a good approach, and I find that to also it's a good approach.
And
it's intellectually sound policy.
Right, and if you eliminate all subsidies, theoretically, you should have the free market folks jumping on board because you're letting the market do its thing.
And I'll tell you, here's the other thing I do. I combine the elimination of subsidies with a national renewable fuel portfolio requirement. When states like Texas, big red states like Texas do RFPs and they work and they create jobs and innovation and they drive up use of no carbon energy, why can't we do that at the national level? So if you did a national RFP plus the elimination of all tax breaks for any form of energy, I think that would be a powerful driver of reducing our carbon footprint.
Is there anything in this current crisis that might crack the door open to that type of legislation or those types of moves on the part of Congress where we move toward a greener economy and a cleaner economy?
I'll be honest with you, Chris. The first bill that was introduced in the Senate about climate change was bipartisan. John Warner and Joe Lieberman. It is no longer bipartisan. The most reliable funder of the GOP is fossil fuels. And the GOP is afraid to alienate their reliable funder. It used to be that businesses of all kinds tended to more support the GOP than the Dems. That's no longer the case. Once the GOP flirted with crashing the debt ceiling and defaulting on financial obligations during the first Obama term, a lot of businesses started to rethink, wait a minute, we're joining together with people who would run the economy over a cliff. But the one piece of the business community that is still rock solid loyal to Republicans is fossil fuel, and they fund all the climate denial, et cetera. So people like Lindsey Graham, who were willing to be part of climate legislation in the past, now are completely against it. So I see this moment in time does open up some interesting opportunities on all kinds of policy fronts. I don't see the Republicans switching to being willing to do climate stuff. And that's one of the reasons we got to take a majority. If we can take a Senate majority, we can start to do climate-related legislation, particularly with a President Biden. We can start to do it. He'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. He can do that on his own. Then there's other things we can do. But I don't see bipartisanship yet in this space. And I'm sad to say that, but it's based on who's the financial backer of the GOP.
How are you feeling about the prospects of a Democratic Senate majority?
I'm feeling good. If you had had me at DemBiz a year ago, then I would have said this: we got to pick up a net 4 seats. We have to hold on to at least 2 that are challenging. Doug Jones in Alabama, challenging. We could win that, but it's uphill. Gary Peters will have a challenging race in Michigan, largely because Trump and Pence will be in Michigan all the time because they got to win Michigan. So they'll have a lot of air war to overcome. But if we hold on to those 2, we have to win 4. A year ago, I could have said we should win Colorado. We should win Arizona. We got an okay chance of winning Maine. But then you're going to say, yeah, but Tim, you said 4. Where's your 4th seat? Well, now, a year later, we should win North Carolina. We got a great chance of winning Montana. We got a great chance of winning Kansas. We've got a candidate in Georgia in that 2nd seat, the Isaacson retirement, Raphael Warnock, who I think would be a very strong candidate. We're polling well in Iowa right now. We have really strong candidates in some tough states like Jamie Harris in South Carolina, Amy McGrath in Kentucky. Those are tough states. But Kentucky just elected a Democratic governor, a year ago. So we suddenly don't have, 3.5 pieces on a chessboard. We've got 8 or 9 pieces on a chessboard, and we have to win net 4. I like our chances.
Okay, that's great to hear.
And let me say one other thing. Biden is helping our candidates in an interesting way. This is obvious to me now, but I wouldn't have predicted it. Biden is polling well because he's showing unusual strength in a group of voters that generally don't vote for Democrats, and that's older voters. This is Trump's golden goose, older voters. This is who his base is. Older voters have a real comfort level with Joe Biden, and that's why polling in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which have an older electorate, but also Florida and Arizona, Biden is polling well in states like that because he's pulling a lot of older voters from the Trump camp into his. We've got to do things, obviously, to energize young voters and minority voters, Asian American, African American, Latino. We've got to do that with the VP pick and some policy choices. We need to. But Biden's strength with older voters, I'm not sure there's another Democrat out there who would have had that ability to pull older voters away from Trump, but Biden's doing it.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because it had occurred to me that in a very crowded Democratic field, regardless of who people supported, the fact that we ended up with a nominee who was mostly known to people in an environment where you can't go out and campaign and introduce yourself and get people to know you from scratch might turn out to be an amazing benefit.
It's true. And the second benefit, I've learned this in campaigns in Virginia. They can only paint an unflattering and untrue picture of you when the voters don't know you. If the voters feel like they know you, they can do whatever negative ads they want. They can make up anything they want. Once voters feel like they know you, you don't have the ability to persuade them but too much off their initial feelings. So the Trump campaign will be horribly negative, just as the 2016 campaign was. But again, Biden is kind of a baked-in thing. You might laugh at some of his gaffes or whatever, but people know he's got a heart. He's a compassionate person. He has demonstrated competence as part of a team with President Obama, and he's a man of character. And they're looking at Trump, and they don't see competence, and they don't see character, and they don't see compassion.
True enough. That will be an interesting one to watch and participate in. All right, let's jump to another question. This one from Jim Edmondson. Coronavirus has made the incredible health disparities tied to race and income more apparent than ever, though we in public health have recognized it for a long time. Can government and the American public become troubled enough by the inequities that we will actually do something to fix it?
I think we have to. I mean, God, and we were seeing this obviously before coronavirus. Just look at the stats on maternal mortality or infant mortality, and they shock you. They're shocking statistics. But now look at the death toll. You know, the African Americans dramatically overrepresented in COVID deaths. Latinos dramatically overrepresented. So I think one of Biden's strong suits, one of Democrats' strong suits going forward is we want to dramatically expand healthcare for all. There's different ways to do it, but we want to dramatically expand healthcare for all, while the other guys, I mean, President Trump is still in the midst of a pandemic and courts trying to take health insurance away from millions and millions of people. One of the reasons that South Korea's death toll was 260 and ours is now 100,000 is they have a national health insurance plan. So anytime anybody's identified as sick, they're going to get treatment. We don't have that here. And that's one of the reasons, in addition to testing and contact tracing failures, that our death toll is so high. So I think if we get a Democratic Senate, I would expect to see, at a minimum, something like the proposal that Michael Bennett and I have, we call Medicare X, which is just let CMS offer a policy that meets the Obamacare essential health benefits, put it on the exchange. They don't have to cover a profit margin, return to shareholders, pay fancy salaries, advertise on the evening news, pay state and local taxes. That will be a policy that will be at a price point that will be affordable for people. And if you qualify for an Obamacare subsidy, you could use that to bring down the Medicare X premium even more. I think if we could do something like that right out of the gate, and a whole lot of people would realize, not because we're making them give up what they have or forcing them to have a government health insurance policy, but they'd realize, why wouldn't I want this? This is so much better than what I could get anywhere else. And then I think you'd see a land rush of people saying, this is actually the right way to run the system. So I think the prospects for dramatic expansion of health coverage for people are very high under a Biden presidency, and if there's a Democratic Senate. I'll tell you my worry. A President Biden with a majority leader, Mitch McConnell. If there is a President Biden, I know how we're going to feel. We're going to feel so excited on Election Day, then on Inauguration Day, and our hopes are going to be up. Finally, we'll do something about climate change. Finally, we'll do immigration reform. Finally, we'll do something about gun violence. Finally, we'll have high hopes. There is nothing that Mitch McConnell likes more than dashing progressive hopes. A, because he's not progressive. But B, he also knows if you dash high hopes, they turn into disappointment quickly. And then disappointment leads to disengagement. Why bother? I shouldn't participate. And then it's his path back to political power. We're going to have to capitalize on the high hopes that people have if Joe Biden's president. And we're not going to be able to capitalize on them with a Republican Senate. So that's what makes the Senate races. I'm going to do all I can to make sure Joe Biden wins Virginia, and I'll do some campaigning for him in Latino communities around the country just because I can do Spanish language circuit work. But the real goal for me is trying to have a Democratic Senate, because without one, the high hopes can turn into disappointment pretty quickly.
Okay. Speaking of elections, I'd say apart from climate change, the most questions that have come in have been related to the Postal Service, the integrity of the election,
Yes.
Trump laying groundwork for losing the election, basically saying everything's a fraud unless he wins. So I'll question here from Abby Fox, asking about the U.S. Post Office possibly running out of funds in September. And then a second part of that, which is Congress going to fully fund states to do absentee ballots? So any variation of those questions.
So some good news and some bad news. So one bit of good news is in the CARES Act, we got $400 million for states to try to, protect their elections during coronavirus. And while we didn't dictate how they use it, most states are using it to bulk up vote by mail. Obviously, Democrats switching the two houses in Virginia led to the elimination of the excuse system for absentee. So no excuse absentee now, a longer period to vote early. And Governor Northam is clearly using the federal dollars and other dollars to encourage people, please vote by mail. So in Virginia, we're going to see, I think, a really good effort on that. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get the Republicans in the Senate to agree to more money for this, because as Trump shows every day, he's afraid of vote by mail. He's afraid of high voter turnout. So there was some good news. We got some money. Bad news is the Republicans, I think, are going to stonewall efforts to get more. Here's another bit of good news, bad news. The protection of the election system at the federal level is in two agencies. The DOD protects against external attacks. The DHS works together with local registrars and state registrars. I give the DHS probably a C grade on that. But I'll tell you this, the DOD, you might think that with the President Trump saying, oh, nobody attacked us, that's all speculation, Russia didn't do anything, you might think the DOD would be acting that way too. To the contrary, the DOD Cyber Command within the DOD has done a very good job. In 2018, I was pretty worried about this because I was on the ballot. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, so I had the ability to exercise some oversight of what the DOD was doing, and they did a wonderful job in 2018 in stopping not only Russian, but other attacks on the electoral system from foreign actors. They did, frankly, what the Obama administration should have done but didn't do, which is if you're subject to an incoming attack, you don't just say to the guy on the other side, hey, don't do that. You know, that's what Obama said to Putin. We know what you're up to. Don't do that. I mean, are you kidding me? That doesn't work. What you do is when there's an attack and you can attribute it, then you do something back so they know, wow, I guess there's a cost if we do this. The DOD made very effective use. They've talked about it publicly in kind of general ways. A lot of what I know is sort of more classified, but they have talked about it publicly in general ways. They let any attacker know you're going to pay 10 times the cost if you attack our election system. And so I have a lot of confidence in the DOD on this score. The attacks get more sophisticated because it worked for Russians. Now other nations are trying to do it too, and some non-state actors. But I will say this, I got a lot of confidence in the DOD's ability and intent to foil foreign attacks. The one thing that we haven't yet figured out, though, is the disinformation. We can stop hacking into our system and exact a cost, but the spread of lies on the internet by the president or anybody, you know, it's hard. It's in a vigorous First Amendment society that has often allowed anonymous speech, especially about politics. It's really hard to get that genie back in the bottle.
And I was fascinated to see this week that Twitter added a fact check button to some of President Trump's tweets, which is long overdue.
Yes.
It's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yes.
So kind of related to that, we're getting a few questions about oversight generally. So we got, I'll just try and blend a couple of them here. Amy's asking about oversight of the executive branch, given the Trump administration's kind of rampant lies and everything else. Your friend and mine, Carlos Del Toro, is asking about oversight of the legislation regarding the financial bailouts and making sure that major corporations aren't getting the money that should go to small businesses. And then I'll add another one on there in case you haven't had enough of this question. You were way out front in congressional oversight of the presidential war powers, and you put forth a resolution regarding Iran, and you've done this both in the Obama administration and in the Trump administration. So can you talk a little bit about oversight generally, but also as it pertains to those items? Sure.
And there's sort of two kinds of oversight. One is war powers or trade. It's not even really oversight. It's in the Constitution that trade is for Congress. War powers are for Congress, but Congresses of both parties over many years have just kind of delegated or allowed executives to do it. So some of this is, can we claw back powers that were supposed to be congressional? I don't think a president should start a war without a vote of Congress, and I don't think a president should start a trade war without a vote of Congress. I wouldn't let presidents unilaterally impose tariffs. I would have a president present a proposal to Congress about tariff imposition and get guaranteed an up or down vote within a reasonable period of time, kind of like you do with, trade deals. But I wouldn't let a president just do it on his or her own, absent some really clearly defined national security emergency. So we need to haul powers back. I do think, war powers is a good example. When I came into Congress, nobody was interested in this issue. I was very lonely as I was pestering the Obama administration about it. But over time, for a variety of reasons, including Trump's mercurial nature, more and more members of Congress are like, you know what, yeah, we really need to get this back. So we've now, in the last year, I've sponsored 2 different war powers efforts that have passed both houses, gotten to the president's desk, one with respect to Yemen, one with respect to Iran. And the president vetoes it and says, Congress, you can't tell me what to do. And we don't yet have the votes to override the veto. But what we've noticed is it affects the president's behavior. When he gets something like that on his desk, he doesn't care about Congress, but he's like, Congress is listening to their voters. Their voters are probably telling them more wars are really not a good idea right now. More wars aren't that popular. And so it ends up affecting his thinking about what the public likes or doesn't like. So Trump doesn't care about Congress, but he cares deeply about polling and what the public thinks about things like war. So I think we're starting to haul that back. But on the oversight question, sort of technical oversight, the kind that, you know, Congress is supposed to do over executive agencies, Trump has really shown how a president who's determined to do so can almost thwart it. So first, a Republican Senate, the Republican committee chairs just don't have hearings. I mean, we haven't had Pompeo before the Foreign Relations Committee in over a year, even though the impeachment was Rudy Giuliani, you know, the shadow ambassador making U.S. policy in the Ukraine? Is it the State Department that's doing foreign policy, or is it freelancers? Can you fire an ambassador because Rudy Giuliani says should be fired? We should have had Pompeo in the chair like within 24 hours of that news breaking, but no, he's never had to be held accountable. So Republican committee chairs don't allow oversight hearings. On the House side, we've got Democratic chairs, and they do oversight. But if the Trump team says we're not sending witnesses up, we're not complying with subpoenas for documents, we can battle that out in the courts. The problem is that is not a battle that, you know, in real time you can get an answer like that. And some of the oversight you need to do, like, why are you firing inspector generals? You know, it's not as effective if you have to go to court and then 6 months or a year later, you know, you get a favorable ruling. So Trump is really destined to, he's really intentionally focused on thwarting congressional oversight. I think the House is doing a lot of good stuff, and they have been able to work in a tough environment to do a lot of good oversight. But I want to have some Democratic committee chairs in the Senate so we can really start to crack into this, because basically the Republican committee chairs are thwarting efforts to do this right now.
Okay. Jump into another question from Brian. Are you planning to travel to Milwaukee in August? I'm watching the machinations going on with North Carolina. What are Dems planning for their convention?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Brian. So look, if we're in Milwaukee in August, I'm going to be there with the Virginia delegation. That's my favorite part of the convention, is hanging out with the Virginia delegation. And, you know, I usually figure out some local band I can get to come, and then I play with them and we have a good time, and I'm sure I'll be doing that again. But I do know this. I know Tom Perez and I have not spoken about this directly, but I know what's going on, which is they backed the convention up essentially a month, and I'm sure they're working plan A is being in Milwaukee, and plan B is, do we do a convention in a virtual way? I'm sure the dramatic preference is plan A, not plan B. But I am sure they're also trying to be prudent and work on both plans. But whether it's in Milwaukee or whether it's virtual, my goal for the convention will be to be doing something with our Virginia delegation.
All right. That's great to hear. You mentioned the Obama administration earlier, and as long as we're talking about conventions and elections, you're friends with the former president. He's now starting to assert himself a little more into this after really doing an amazing job of, staying kind of on the sidelines and letting things play out naturally. What do you expect from him over the next 6 months or so?
I think you're going to see President Obama be incredibly invested in Joe Biden winning. I know, because I know President Obama pretty well. And look, President Obama vetted both me and Joe in 2008 to be on the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And then he asked me to be DNC chair. And I spent a lot of time in the first 2 years of the first Obama term with the president and with the vice president doing that job. The friendship there is very, very real. And President Obama's sense of gratitude to Joe for the help that he provided. They were a really good mixture. I think most people, you can understand this about teams. In a team of 2 or 20, having similar values is important, but it's actually pretty good to have different temperaments. Similar values and similar temperaments, you don't get the 360 view, but similar values and different temperaments will give you the 360 view. Biden and Barack's temperaments are very, very different. That helped Barack many times because he was more cerebral, a little bit more of a introvert in a Myers-Briggs way. Biden was the opposite. Biden really helped Barack in that way, and Barack knows that, and he has a real sense of gratitude and a belief that my presidency was better because of Joe Biden. Then you add to it, the personal dimension of, being a friend to Joe when Joe's son Bo died. There's just a depth of affection in that relationship. I think Barack and Michelle will both pull out every stop they can to make sure that Joe is successful. Now, I'm sure President Obama is also going to be paying special attention to Senate races and trying to help out. I could see, for example, we got a chance to win electoral votes in Georgia for the first time in a very long time. And we also have Senate races there we can win. So you could see Barack and Michelle being in Georgia helping with Senate and electoral votes. But I think you're going to see a level of presidential engagement in this race unlike anything you've ever seen from anyone because of the depths of the relationship between Joe Biden and Barack Obama.
And having been through the vice presidential vetting process and having been selected as a running mate yourself, how do you view that process differently than we do? What do you think we can expect over the next, call it, couple of weeks, months?
So I think I don't know that I have any particular, deep insight into the process that you don't have. It's a big tryout, and the presidential nominee is trying to make a decision that balances out. Here's somebody I can govern with. Here's somebody who could be a president, a good president if something happened to me. Here's somebody who could help me win. And you're trying to balance those things. And then there are some other factors like, do I want to take a senator? Oh, but that senator has a Republican governor, and then I might lose a seat in the Senate. So there's all kinds of factors. But the two big ones are, will this person be a good governing partner? Will this person help me win? I think the Biden team has 3 potential paths that they're analyzing for a pick. And I'm saying this from intuition. I'm not reporting what I've learned, but I've been through it twice now, so I pretty much can figure this out. I think they have 3 potential paths. Do we pick somebody who we think will maximize our ability to add back the upper Midwestern states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe even Ohio, which has been slipping away, but polling would suggest with Biden as the nominee could be doable. So do we pick somebody, and Joe said he's going to pick a woman, do we pick a woman who could help us in upper Midwestern states? That's one path. A second path is, how comfortable do we feel that Bernie Sanders supporters will be enthusiastic about this ticket? Do we need to pick somebody who will energize the Sanders voters? Hillary obviously didn't energize the Sanders voters by picking me. So we've seen that, okay, well, we got to be concerned about that. Now, I will say Bernie has gotten on board with Joe early, full-throated, sincerely. They know each other very well. They served together for a long time. They're friends. So Bernie's helping with that. But, they may decide that that's a path they need to go. Energize Bernie Sanders supporting progressives. And then the third path is, what? Democrats now know, a ticket that has some racial diversity on it can do pretty well. President Obama was president twice. There have been, almost every ticket in the history of this country has been 2 white people. So if we're going to energize minority voters, don't we want to have a ticket that looks like America looks? do we need to have a person of color, the Latino or Asian American, African American on the ticket? And so now those aren't all mutually exclusive. Some could, appeal in a couple of those ways. But I think the vice president is probably thinking through all of those paths. What is the most likely path to get success? And I think he said yesterday he's not going to announce it until around the 1st of August. So the other thing that's interesting right now is the contenders in these 3 lanes are all pretty publicly out talking about COVID-19, talking about climate, talking about things. And the vice president is getting a chance to watch and see how they do, which is helpful to him.
And can he get an accurate sense, given that everything's online right now?
That poses some challenges, Chris. I mean, if you think about things that Democrats are really good at, there are things that Republicans maybe do better than us in campaigning, but I think what we do better is person-to-person, door-knocking, grassroots stuff. That's completely different these days. Sure. Trump's great at rallies. Well, it's hard to do those these days. We're great at door-knocking and person-to-person. Hard to do that these days. So the Biden campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, she was my executive director at the DNC when I was chair. She was part of both of Obama's wins, 08-12. She's very, very sharp. But I will say it's Mark Warner on the ballot, our congressional candidates on the ballot. Anybody on the ballot in 2020 is facing, a real challenge and rethinking how do I engage and show people that I really care about them. And you have to solve that puzzle. I think Democrats are probably able to, I like our chances because I think Trump has so mishandled this significant crisis that I think voters are looking for something different. They don't like a status quo that Donald Trump has put on our door of death and depression. They're looking for something different. But we still have to figure out the way to do it in this very unusual environment.
Well, and it's always been my view, just as an aside, that voters, especially persuadable voters, just kind of step back and say, has this person done a good job? I think people recognized that Barack Obama walked into just a horrific set of circumstances and did very well in pulling us through those. And the question is, do those same voters feel the same way about Trump's performance to date? And it seems like they wouldn't, but who knows?
Yeah, it's Donald Trump has a very loyal base of supporters, for darn sure. However, you certainly see softening in some of his most reliable support bases, and that is demonstrated. If you start to dig into these polls that show Biden doing well, okay, I could see why he's doing well, but then why is he doing well? The groups of voters that are helping Biden do well are definitely not those that Dems normally get. And it's like, if you get a vote out of the other guy's column, that's 2 votes. Sure. Persuading an independent who's persuadable, that's 1 vote. But taking a vote that was a Trump vote and put it into your column, that's 2 votes. One less, 1 more. And Biden is getting a lot of those twofers with older voters, and I think he's going to continue to.
Well, that's also great to hear. All right, we're coming up on 10:30. Before we go, you mentioned Mark Warner. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the tuna melt video, which you made a cameo in, by the way. So I hope you're collecting some royalties from that. But I guess he's a two slice of cheese guy and a whole lot of man. Guy. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
My favorite part of that video was Mark was so deadpan that a lot of people thought it was serious. Yeah. If you know Mark, that whole thing was just like for fun and kind of a put on. And maybe it was really just a hand washing, video wrapped with a tuna melt around it, But a lot of people really thought it was serious. And reading the comments of people who didn't get that Mark was putting them on, that was my favorite part of the whole thing. Mark is an amazing colleague, somebody who, I'm really fortunate to have him. He is very, very focused on this race, taking nothing for granted, frustrated that he's not able to, be out doing events in person. I mean, I know he's very frustrated by the current dynamic, but, look, I think Mark's going to be the chairman of the Intel committee in January of next year.
That'd be great.
And that is a really important position to have a good balanced person in, and we'd be in great shape as a country if Mark were the chair of that committee.
Well, and certainly we hope that people on this call and in the DemBiz community support Senator Warner's reelection campaign. We had him on back in April and plan to have him on again in the summer or fall. And we'd love to hear from you again later this year because there's so much going on and it's moving so fast. But Senator Tim Kaine, thank you so much for taking some time out this morning. It's great to hear from you again. Best of luck with everything you're working on in Congress, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Chris, I look forward to it, and I really look forward to the time when we can do this in person again.
Absolutely.
All right, you take care. Everybody have a good day.
Everyone, thanks for joining. We'll talk to you again soon.